Hello everyone and welcome. I'm very pleased to welcome Steve Gore, the co-owner and director of the company Koap. You can see the name behind your back. And I have had a real pleasure working together with Steve, and we've known each other for quite a long time now. So I invited Steve to talk about your experience. You have amazing experience working with different leaders in different companies, different sectors, and around the globe. So there's a lot we can tap into. And also you've been accredited with the certificate from the Paul Ekman group, which is fascinating. So we're going to talk definitely about micro expressions today as well. I would like you, Steve, to just say in few words, present yourself first, and then I'm going to have a first question for you.
That's great. Thank you. Welcome. So it's great to be here with you, Anna. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you. And as you say, background, we've been operating Koap for over a decade now. I've been working in leadership and development and soft skills development for almost 30 years, predominantly, I'd say, outside of England, although I'm based in England. Most of my work takes me all over the world, which is nice, except in this moment when we're all locked down. And we were just talking before we started the recording about how working from home changes things, and this new video world means that the work we do with micro expressions is even more important, because all I can see is your face. I lose a lot of that physiology piece that we would normally pick up on. So yeah, I'm fascinated by humans, I'm fascinated by people, and looking forward to our conversation.
Amazing. And I'm actually pleased you started mentioning your, did you say 30 years of experience almost, right? And that's why I have this question ready, because I knew you're gonna mention generations and the age, and I was wondering, I would be curious to hear, what do you think? How do you think the leaders from 20 or even 30 years ago, how different would that be for them to manage pandemic if that happened then? Would that be different?
Definitely. I think if we look generationally, before so I'm 60 this year. So the generation before me that was brought up just post-war era is the foundation for, I think, how organizations have been designed. And it was built around a mentality, a manufacturing mentality, because most of the business world was industry based. So of course you would build an organization around time and hours and working hours. And you can see it in organizations. You know, you look at HR policies and everything's based around how many days a week are we going to pay you? How many days off are you going to, what's your working hour between 9 and 5? And everything is based around time frames. Well, what the pandemic has done is thrown all of that out of the window. Because, you know, as a working mum, you're at home, you have children, you have a family to look after. Everybody's crammed into the house, but you also have work to do. And how do you balance that? And I think from a leadership perspective, where some of the senior leaders that I'm speaking to now are struggling is they still have this mindset. If I can't see you, if you're not in the office, do I know you're working? And that's a real trust issue. Yeah. And you know, you and I know, but both know that humans, whilst we are incredible in that we have survived for hundreds of thousands of years because we can adapt. That's one of our key superpowers. We've adapted to the world around us. I think the problem we face now is that the world is changing so quickly. Physiologically, we're becoming, especially as we get older, more worried about that change. So I think the short answer is yes, older leaders may struggle more because they've got into a habit of thinking it's all about time. The younger generation that's coming through, they're more adaptable to this. You know, they're more used to working at strange times and adapting their lifestyle. So I think it's easier for them to, in a certain degree. But I think lockdown and isolation and not being in the office is starting to take its toll on everybody. Yeah. So I think there's a common thread there, because we are a social animal, and people are saying what the people I'm talking to now are just saying, I just need to get back into the office just to mix for a few hours, and then I'll come home. I want a balance.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily want everybody back in the office, but I want a balance. I want the choice to go into work and come out of work. So as we come out of this pandemic and go back into the workplace, I think all leaders are going to struggle to try and work out how do I motivate, how do I manage, how do I get the output I need from my people. Bit of a long-winded answer, I'm sorry.
No, it's a lot of angles you could take that from. So, and obviously we have to appreciate the time is limited as well. But you've mentioned probably one of the maybe even most repeated words, if not definitely something that we do think about, is the trust and building that trust. And that's something that's easy to say, harder to do. How can leaders build that trust, and especially in that environment when you just have, as we know, the screen, and that's it?
I would say three things. First one, be vulnerable, be honest. You're human. Just because you're a leader doesn't make you any different from anybody else. Rank is not important. The second one is be present. The hardest thing in this environment is to stay focused.
Yeah.
You're even though we're talking and we're in a meeting, we're isolated. You're sitting in your environment and you're talking at a screen. I'm sitting in my environment. You can't see my environment, and I'm talking. There's so many potential distractions. So be present. And the third thing, which is the hardest thing, I think, for a lot of leaders, because we are trained to be task orientated. So we think as a leader, what we really need to be doing is talking to our people about output.
Yes.
When what we really should be doing is be curious about your team member, be curious about the member of staff, and be interested in what's going on for them, because that's going to give you an awful lot of insight into output.
Yeah.
And how somebody feels is an incredibly important thing for leaders to learn, I think.
Yeah, it's not just a waffle thing to talk about because that's the right thing to do, but that's something that it can give you very valuable insights. And actually thinking about it, how can we bring that to life? I have a question I thought about, because you talked about knowing the person, but also mentioned the output. So I'm very curious, and let's just, I'm more than happy to be used as a guinea pig. And I'm just going to bring a little bit of a background. So we've met when actually I was in my first HR role in the UK. So I actually smile at that, Anna. I'm very, very, very happy with her, but I can see things have changed and moved on since as well for me. And then we did a project together on the company culture and the values and engagement and leadership. So that was actually, I'm counting my lucky stars that for my then manager and the support I was given and working with people like your company was amazing. But then we haven't really worked together and we've restarted a year ago. And I'm thinking there is and I really appreciate the trust that you put in me and the vulnerability that came with it, to trust with your clients, for example, right? So I'm wondering, how to put this question so it sounds correct? Was there something about me, or is there something about your ability as a leader to spot, let's say, potential based on, not even day-to-day interactions? Do you know what I mean? What's important?
I think both of those questions, both of those things are really, really important. The reason I trusted you was because I didn't just see potential. I saw the mindset. When we work with our clients, it's very, very important for me to have the right mindset when working with a customer. It frustrates me when people talk about so-called soft skills, because that's what we work in, the soft skills market. Yeah. It's like, well, they're not soft, they're hard. I mean, they're hard to learn and they're hard to actually deliver. Yeah. And that's where the skill piece comes in from a leadership perspective. If you can actually look at somebody and assess, are they genuine? Do they mean what they say? Do they believe in what they say? Then that's an incredible skill to develop, but it's a really hard skill to deploy, because the first thing you have to do is realize it's not about you, it's about them. And one of my frustrations in the training world is that I've worked with far too many trainers who know stuff, who know an awful lot of stuff. And this engagement with a client is a way for them to share that stuff.
Yeah.
And that puts it all about them and not all about the client. So I trusted you in a very simple way because I knew you worried about the client. And that's the most important thing for me. The rest, well, that will come.
Yeah.
And the rest, the knowledge, the skill, the experience, that will come. But if you don't have that key piece, then you're not really going to be able to represent what we believe.
Yeah.
So all I had to do was to see if you were telling me the truth or not.
On that note, we know that you know how to spot that, right?
With,
That's one of the great things about Paul Ekman. You know,
Yes.
I mean, I've studied psychology all my working life out of interest, not out of a degree or qualification perspective, but out of interest to apply it. And many years ago, I got hooked on the work by Paul Ekman. Paul Ekman, a psychologist and sociologist, studied human emotions, and he wrote the book. I mean, he wrote the book that underpins what we now believe the human physiology does when our internal mechanism feels an emotion. So when you feel something, what do you do from a physiological point of view? And what he found is that there are universal facial expressions that happen at a tenth of a second, and even 100th of a second before you even know it's happened. So you can't hide them because your brain is working so quickly that the moment you feel it, we see it. And these are universal. They're not culturally specific as micro expressions. The macro expressions, the bigger physiological movement that lasts longer than a tenth of a second, they can be cultural, you know. But these 7 micro expressions to do with fear, anger, happiness, sadness, disgust and contempt, and then surprise, are seen in babies. They are seen in the animal kingdom. I mean, contempt is one of the most dominant facial expressions you'll ever see, and especially if you look at gorillas. I mean, they will see it. You'll see this what we call an asymmetrical smile when a young gorilla is trying to depose the leader, and the leader will just look at him, and you'll say, yeah. And you can tell a story about that expression. Well, we do the same. You know, men and women are territorial, and contempt is a sense of superiority. So when you see somebody who smiles and it's what we call asymmetrical, so it's only on one side of the face, it's either that side or this, then you can tell that person has an emotion that's, you know, it's not a genuine smile. There's something else going on. So what you're looking at is trigger points, and it's not about mind reading, but it is about looking and being present, like I said before, and understanding when what somebody is saying isn't matching with what you're seeing on their face. So as I went through all of that, I could see you were thinking of new questions, and you were dying to ask me a question, and you were waiting for me to shut up so that you could butt in, which is great. And I know it's genuine interest.
It's the famous listen to respond versus listen to understand. Yeah. It's tricky. Yeah, it is tricky with those videos because, you know, and definitely if let me play the ADHD card. If you know, once I naturally have thoughts. 2, I know I have to be constrained with the time, and 3, I'm caring about the clients and the listeners. I want to make sure that, you know, I can squeeze out of you as much as possible.
But that's the challenge. And when we first met, I didn't know about your ADHD.
Me either. I didn't know
either.
So as we were going through that, you know, as I was speaking, you know, and in the video world, one of the challenges you face is that, you know, I've got you full screen, so I can see all of your face. And as we were talking, I saw you look beyond the screen. So you stopped looking at me for just a microsecond.
Yeah.
And what we have to understand is my vulnerability is recognizing that and processing and not being offended by it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas you must have seen the people who are going
Yeah.
and looking at an email that's just popped up on their phone, or it's like, what is that saying to the person who's on the other side of the video camera? It's basically saying, yeah, I'm bored now. This is more interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that breaks down your relationship. Going to talking about trust,
Yes.
trust is about a vulnerable, acceptable, and genuine relationship between two people. And it comes with time. It's easily said, as you've said, but it's lost in a heartbeat.
Especially in the world of distractions we're living in today as well. But it's easy to say, but it's important to remember. It's like a person with ADHD can try to stay focused and be on the person that we have in front of us.
But that goes to your favorite topic, inclusion. It's the more you know about a person, the more you can be inclusive.
Yeah.
For me, inclusivity is again, but back to that thing I mentioned about being curious. In English, we talk about people who are nosy, who dig too deep. It's like, okay, so you have to have boundaries. And again, with micro expressions, that's really good, because one of the other micro expressions is disgust, which is it's a nose wrinkle. So you get a horseshoe here, and it's like somebody's put a bad smell under your nose. But you also see it when somebody goes like, really? You've challenged them in a way that has made them react. And again, as a micro expression, you've pushed too far then. You've challenged something that's deep inside them. Whether it be their values, their sense of propriety, what's right and what's wrong, whether you've gone off topic, or you've gone down an avenue that they don't feel comfortable with. So knowing that expression and then modulating the way you deal with the person after that helps retain that trust. Because from my perspective, I love to push boundaries. I love to challenge people to get them to become more self-aware.
Yeah.
But you can only push so far. Then you have to stop.
So if I understand it correctly, you are able obviously to spot the expression, so you can label it in a sense of naming it. I don't mean labeling in like labeling person with ADHD, for example. So naming that, for example, discuss. And then what do you do with it? Then you assess, is it a time to probe, or is it a time to back up, for example?
Yeah. And the more you practice it, the quicker your assessments. So you have these appraisers in your brain. And once you develop the habit of scanning people's facial expressions for micro expressions, then your appraisers are all then sort of deciding, well, what action am I going to take? Because I want to go down this route, but I'm seeing disgust, then I'm seeing anger. So it's probably not the right time. I could see surprise and then happiness. Oh, hang on a second. This is a topic the person wants to explore. So let's dig a bit deeper. And it's like, you know my story about driving a car. The one I always use when there's a look of surprise, and I'm not quite sure where this is going. So when you first learn to drive a car, the first three things the driving instructor says is mirror, signal, maneuver. And if you see somebody doing it, it's sort of like mirror, signal, maneuver. And you actually displayed then this frown, which as your eyebrows come down, that's also a micro expression of anger. But yours was held longer, and that's cognitive load. That's you thinking. All right. Now, when you start something new, you have to think about it. So it becomes difficult and clunky, just like driving a car for the first time. But the more you drive a car, the easier it becomes, until you get to the point where you'll go from point A to point B and not remember anything about the journey, because it becomes a subconscious act. So I've trained to the point now where scanning people is a subconscious act. I don't think about it. I just get the signals that then I can then appraise, and I can adapt to. But as a leader, learning how to do that, I think is gives you an advantage.
Yeah.
Gives you a way of, especially in this environment where your team members are potentially going to be stressed, potentially going to be struggling, being able to assess that and knowing when it's time to put pressure from an output perspective,
Yes.
and when it's time to just back off, give them some space, listen to understand, and build a relationship.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. Also, with inclusion and diversity point of view, I've seen many stats and studies that show that people with diverse background do tend to mask who they are. They're not authentic self. It's nice to say be authentic self, but it's not always difficult, especially when you're not like others. And that's so I think having that skill, ability to pick up on those signals gives the leader a key almost to unlock a person.
Because that inclusivity is about feeling comfortable enough to come as yourself. But the challenge is, and I, as you know, I did a podcast with my nephew quite recently about the whole white privilege piece, because I was really struggling with that. And it was interesting listening to him, because one of the outtakes of that wasn't published, we talked about adapting. And as I said it earlier on, humans are brilliant at adaptation. That's how we've survived. And I adapt in given situations. You will adapt in different situations. We call it wearing masks. You will wear a social mask to fit in. The challenge when you're in the minority is that mask is so closed because you just have no connection. And my first experience of that, which my nephew brought me back to, was when I first met my wife and I met her father, who was West Indian. And we went to a West Indian center, and I literally was one of 3 white faces in a sea of Afro-Caribbeans. And it was uncomfortable because even though they were speaking English, I didn't understand the dialect. I didn't understand the language. And you do find yourself shrinking. And people either shrink or they they try too hard. And within time, you learn to balance. But then it made me think. And when I first started work, I come from a working class background in Liverpool. We have really strong Scouse accents. And when I first started working, I had a really strong Scouse accent. But because of the environment I was working in, it wasn't appropriate. So I had to change it. I had to adapt to fit in. You speak multiple languages, which drives me insane. I'm jealous.
I just posted my Swedish video today.
But when you're just showing off now.
Of course.
When we've done these video recordings, I've seen you change. You're so much more relaxed in this one than the last one you did.
Yes.
Because you're not trying as hard now.
Yes. You taught me, you see?
You
did.
But you open the door to somebody and they walk through it. And you're so much more powerful when you relax. And I think for me, that's inclusion. It's when somebody feels comfortable enough, like you say, to be themselves and just relax. That's when you get the most out of people.
I did tell you that, and I've mentioned that in your podcast as well. But that was very powerful those many years ago when you did exercise with team profiling, where are our strengths. And whenever I do those exercises in different teams, I almost always end up to the opposite of my team's members. And I think it has to do something to do with the ADHD as well. And it was back then, so that was I think it was only 2 years in the UK. I was in my new role. I wasn't as comfortable in English as I am today. And I was a foreigner and so on. So I really felt like, oh no, I'm not like everybody else. And I really was beating myself up. And you picked up on my body language. Because you were a great observer back then, and you did get out of me why I'm so upset or like worried. And you did say something very powerful, and that I think it really helped me as well, see myself in a different light, which is, it's great that the team has someone with different skill sets. You know, teams sometimes will need those people who are very detail oriented or very strategic thinking, and they will need someone like you as well. It's great. It's your good thing, and it's a good thing for the team as well. So I suddenly saw myself in a completely new light, and now I start calling it going from validation, like I have to, you know, fit in and strive to be like everybody else, into just feel like it's valid for me and for the people around me. So as I've mentioned, I was lucky to be at TP back then, and that this is where everything has started. But yeah, it's very important, it can be really transformative. And once you unlock the person, it's not only good for the individual, team benefits from it, manager benefits from it. We just have to go through the hurdles first, create a space, I guess. And this is hard, but then it gets so much easier, doesn't it?
It does, and that goes back to your original question about, in the pandemic, is it hard for older leaders, you know, more mature leaders of a different generation to adapt? And I think it's a mindset. Like I said, you know, they were in leadership courses were always about managing your team, you know, manage your people, manage your, and think output based, talk to them about what it is that they need to deliver. And it was always focused on tasks. Added to that, there was in the early days, there was very little leadership training as such. You know, most people were promoted into a management role and then said, okay, go do it. They weren't given any guidance. They weren't given any mentoring. It was like, and when you're promoted from within a team and you've been doing the task, you know, managing people who are doing that task, your brain is focused on the task.
Yeah.
And what we try and help people to understand, and that's what we're doing with you, is that as a leader, your tool set has changed. Whether it was a spreadsheet to do accounting or whether it was a hammer to bend metal, that was what you did as an individual contributor. As a leader or a manager, your tools are now people. So treat people the same way as you treat your tools. You know, focus on them, make sure you've got the right software level in, that it's operating effectively, that, you know, you've got a device that works smoothly, and the results will happen. So it is just about changing the way people think. And once you become curious about your people, I think you naturally become more inclusive. On that inclusivity thing, go back to the ancient history piece. The one thing I always default to is that the feeling you feel when you see something different is natural. We survived as a species by learning very early on, same is safe.
Yes.
Different is dangerous. So your primitive brain sitting at the top of your spine is on high alert for same. And if you live in a multicultural environment, then inclusion is somewhat easier, but there are still communities that you're unfamiliar with, and they become threat at a subconscious level. There are ways of thinking that are different. That's a threat. There are ways of speaking that are different. That's a threat. Anything that is different, your brain will process as a threat. So getting to understand that and turning that emotion into curiosity gives you an edge, because then you can look at somebody else and see them going through the same process and help them.
Micro expression, Steve. I know you have what I would call like a natural curiosity about the person, and when I first met you, that really stuck to me, how great observer you are and how you can use it to tune into another person. And that's actually something I've heard from others as well about you. Is there something with a situation where tuning into the micro expressions, or put simply, tuning into another person has made a difference, like a real difference that you can tell? Yes, I'm glad I've done it.
Personal or business?
Well, business.
Okay. Yes. I mean, there are so many. There's so many that I could describe to you, but being able to, when you're in a classroom with people, and we're talking about emotional intelligence, one of the first journeys we take people on is self-awareness. And scanning a room with people to observe their reactions to what you're saying is critical. I've only really ever had one situation where I made a mistake. And I say I made a mistake, but because somebody had an emotional episode, and it was nothing that I'd done directly. However, my observation was poor, and I didn't see the signs that this person was being uncomfortable by the topics that were being brought up by the other people in the group. And we were doing something very, very simple. We do a speed dating exercise where we try to get people into buddies. And everybody seemed okay with it. Everybody gets a bit nervous about it because, you're going around, you're having conversations with people, then you have to choose somebody, somebody that you're going to then work with for the rest of the program. And it's almost like going back to school and being chosen for a team. And this particular individual, in my debrief with them afterwards, when I sat down with them, that's how they felt. And they'd had situations back at school, and they had this incredible, how can I put it, insecurity about being liked. And put into that situation made them uncomfortable. Now, I should have seen that. It was a long time ago, but it still sticks with me.
Yeah.
So now I do. Whenever you see a large group, you are picking out the people, and you're looking at the micro expressions as you talk about different topics, and you're seeing whether somebody's comfortable with it, whether they're not. Is there an issue? And then you can guide that person. So in a group situation, it's incredibly important. But then in a one-to-one session, when you're coaching, there was a particular individual who, at the beginning of our coaching sessions, was completely engaged but not committed. And they were saying all of the right things. And, if I hadn't got my radar on, I would have accepted, thinking this is running perfectly. I'm just looking and going like, it doesn't add up. It's not right. And it took a few sessions, but I developed, I understood, and I recognized what the tells were. So Paul Ekman's work is really used in the military and in enforcement for interrogations. So it's an interrogation technique. It's like being a lie detector. And you're looking for not just, it gets quite complex, not just looking for the facial expression that gives you the misconnection, but you're also looking for the shift and change in language. And this particular individual moved away from personal language to third-party language whenever they went to commitments. And it's like, that doesn't match. You're not going to do this. And so I took a risk. I took a gamble. And it was what I was watching for: anger, fear, disgust. And I saw anger. And I thought, do I take the chance? And I did. And I pushed the button. And it was almost like popping a balloon, because all of a sudden this person just went and sat there for, I don't know, maybe 60 seconds. It felt like an hour. And then they opened up, and they were really, really struggling. They had incredible imposter syndrome. They didn't believe they had the capabilities, and it was all front. It was all about what they could, not what they would. And it was great, because I built such a strong. In fact, this happened 9 years ago, and I was only talking to them again last week. So I'm still in contact with this individual, and it's lovely to see how they have removed that imposter syndrome from the psyche. They've stopped having those conversations with themselves. They've stopped using the language that has inhibited them, and they've started to actually believe in their worth. They've started to develop, and they've got a great career. It's got nothing to do with me. It's not that I'm taking pride in their career. I'm just happy. I really do have a genuine pride in seeing that person be the best that they could be. And that just makes me feel, that's why I do this job. I love it when stuff like that happens.
Yeah, I totally can relate to that feeling. So great example. You've said that you've pushed that button. Oh no, did you say either push that button. Are you going there? Are you not going there? Are you acting on it? Can you give
mental question?
Yeah.
Do I feel safe that I can do this without damaging that person?
Yeah.
Yes. And can you give an example of, because it sounds like it may be a big thing, but sometimes just a question. What pushing buttons in those situations may mean. So
it is purely asking a question.
Yeah.
I mean, something as simple. We use the, like, we love mnemonics. So the TED mnemonic: tell me, explain to me, describe to me, and explain to me how that's going to happen. And you're forcing the person then to move beyond the flippant response and getting them to think a little bit deeper. Describe to me how that's going to feel. And all of a sudden, they can't just give you a flippant answer. And it's gentle. I would never be aggressive, not on purpose.
Yes.
Aggression can be perceived. Obviously, people can feel threatened by any conversation or any question. But I would never intentionally be aggressive. But like I've said to you, I am curious about the interesting topics. I'm curious about the what potentially could be classed as taboo conversations, because I genuinely am interested in what people think.
Yeah. I've read this book by David Rock from, obviously, you know very well, the new Neuroscience Leadership Institute. The Quiet Leaders or Quiet Leadership.
Yeah.
And basically, all it is about is helping people with the quality of thinking, helping them think through. And it's not about finger pointing, it's asking those powerful questions, isn't it? And be present as well. So, a fantastic example. I wanted to flip it on the side, not on the side, on the roles, because we all often talk about leaders. But I just wanted to focus on the individuals for a second, because for one, that's aggression probably more. I know that I've spoken obviously with so many employees, and they have this view of the managers very often as they know everything, or they not imposters, or I mean the expectations people can put on leaders are actually very high on managers, without realizing, they have to sometimes act in a certain way, but doesn't mean they're not prompt to vulnerabilities themselves. That's one thing. And another thing as well is, if you are, and I've heard that question before, if you're an employee that, let's say, can't be their authentic self themselves, and they are present with the managers and they can spot certain things with the managers, how they can manage the manager almost, what's the tip for them? Or is there anything useful in the micro expressions maybe?
Oh yeah. So that's such a big topic. I think there's a great book, Learned Optimism, and it talks about actually learned helplessness. And go back to the question about leaders and the way organizations have been designed. I think organizations are designed and leaders are put into positions where they do teach helplessness of their staff and then cry for accountability of their staff. And we have to change that, because learned helplessness is it's a dangerous thing to do. So I'm thinking how to answer this, because from a cultural perspective, if you go to Asia, there is a culture of hierarchy where people go to work and they are expected to be told what to do and go and do it. Very process orientated. You go to America and there is a culture of independence, where people have a right to have a voice and speak. And somewhere in the middle is balance on all of that. But as an individual contributor, as somebody who works for an organization, I think most of my conversations with people when we're doing coaching is about finding and you know me, there's certain Japanese cultural metaphors I love. And one is ikigai, your passion, your reason for being. And people always jump on this and they go like, well, hang on a second, I don't have to have a passion. No, but you've got to want to do something. If you follow ikigai to its extreme, it's spiritual. It's your meaning for being on this planet. Well, we're not getting spiritual, but what we're talking about is what gets you out of bed in the morning. And there are two things: there's work and there's a job. Now, I believe we teach children in schools to get a job, because we are in a society that requires you to have earnings, to buy the nice things, to get the house, to get on, and you need a job. So unless you're a millionaire, you've got to get a job.
Yeah.
But if it's just a job and you get paid for it, then most people, when you have a conversation with them, and I think in the Happiness Advantage, Sean Acker did the research, and something like 50 to 60% of the global population sort of go to work and you're like, nah, if I'm not here, I'll be somewhere else. It's just a job.
Yeah.
But the 13% who work for a living, who wake up every morning and go like, I'm really looking forward to doing this. That's Ikigai for me. That's a sense of purpose. That's, I will never, ever retire because I love what I do.
Yeah.
I get up every morning and conversations with people like you energize me.
Yeah.
That's work. And one of the fundamentals of the human condition is we need to achieve, we need to do something. We need to feel like we are contributing, that we are valued, that we have a sense of worth. And work does that. Work is a visible representation of that. So even if I did win $1 million or $10 million or $100 million, I'd still work. I couldn't sit down and do nothing. So the answer to your question, first of all, is decide, is this a job or is it work?
Yeah.
Because that determines how you turn up every day.
Yeah.
And that's the emotional intelligence and self-worth. That then frees you to be the best version of yourself, but it also opens your eyes to be able to look at other people. And you asked about managing the relationships and how do you manage your manager. Yeah. So it's being able to understand why a manager behaves in a certain way. Why is your leader behaving that way? And without being too trivial about this, it's because it's easy and they know it works. And you, like a good sheep that you are, you respond in the way that they expect and then go and complain about it.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing you have to do is don't respond in the way that they expect. Don't be emotional about it and just either give in or fight back. Be logical with it. Listen to understand, question to be curious, and act appropriately. Nobody has the right to bully in the workplace. Nobody has the right to be angry, demand, and highly emotional. I disagree with any book anybody has ever written that says it's okay to be yourself. No, it is okay to be yourself, but not your angry self.
Yeah.
There's no place in the workplace for me for that. So back to our inclusion thing, everybody should feel comfortable to be themselves, but we have to own that. And we talk about multiple levels of self-awareness. When we're a victim, learned helplessness. It doesn't matter what I do, what I say. Nobody's going to listen anyway. Yeah. You have to change that language. Yeah. And you have to build the inner strength to go, well, actually, no, I can't do that. And then you learn the positive language of connection. And what you do is typically you respond to your boss by saying, no, I can't do that because. And all that does is it initiates an emotional conversation.
Yeah.
Which is not necessarily helpful. Yeah. Whereas if you can calmly say, okay, I understand. However, because I can't do this, but I can do that. Yeah. Or I can't do this now, but I could do that. And what you're doing is just by changing the language, just by changing the order of the questions, you're taking them through your thought processes and then giving them a solution, not just a problem.
Yes.
Do that and you'll start to build a relationship even with the worst leader. And unfortunately, I actually was having that conversation with somebody this week at a very, very senior level with it's sort of like senior -1 who was a little bit of a tyrant with a military background who had a very dictatorial approach to how things should be done at the leadership team. And senior leaders were struggling to work out how to deal with the individual. And it's about being strong. It's about being logical and unemotional.
Yes.
And managing how you feel and what you're doing and not letting that person make you feel because their behavior is inappropriate.
Yeah. No,
Make sense?
Absolutely makes sense. Very useful, and thank you very much, Steve. Thank you very much. I know we could be going on but I think we've really talked about the important stuff. So thank you so much, Steve. It was a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure with you, Anna, and anytime we can do it, for any topic, just let me know and I'll be here.
Lovely. Thank you.